G'day and welcome to the Genre Fiction podcast. I am Jack Roney.
And I'm not Harry Colfer.
Now that one's getting a bit old. You are Harry Colfer.
Yeah. Thanks.
And hey, Harry, we got a really special guest tonight. I'm going to do a quick intro. Been very stoked to have this man on our show. It's been a little while to organise, but we're so pleased that we've managed to snavel him, and here he is. So Ben Hobson, I'm going to do a quick intro, and then we'll welcome you to the mic, Ben. So Ben Hobson.
Hey, wait, can we just stop for a sec?
Yeah.
When people read out your bio, do you ever feel weird about it?
Yeah, absolutely. But then again, not many people do, so you know.
I always sit here like, did I really do that? And I always feel very strange. Sorry, Jack, to interrupt.
No. Well, look, if my bio was like yours, I'd sit back and just go.
Just luxuriate. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try.
All right. So it's all true, I promise. So Ben Hobson is a Brisbane-based author. He's got a few novels out. The first one, To Become a Whale, his debut novel, was released in 2017. It was longlisted for the Australian Book Industry Awards Debut Fiction Award and shortlisted for the Courier-Mail's People's Choice Award. His second novel, Snake Island, a literary thriller, was released in 2019. The Death of John Lacey, which is a book I've read and I love, and I'll keep spruiking on about it. So The Death of John Lacey, an Australian Western, was released in 2023. It's his third novel. Ben also runs Ben's Book Club, a monthly online book club, and also moonlights doing in-person interviews with authors. And there's a couple of big name authors amongst that list, which I'm keen to talk to you about as well. Yep. And Ben was recently featured as a panellist at the Queensland Writers Centre's Genrecon, and he's also hosted his own podcast called Burgers, Beers and Books. Without further ado, welcome, Ben. So good to have you here on our humble little podcast.
Oh man, I'm very happy to be here, mate. I've been looking forward to it. I've brought a beer because I'm on brand, so I've got my beer.
Well, I've got the there you go, red wine. So
got your red wine. Yeah, you're much more fancy than me.
I wouldn't go as far as that.
Hey, yeah, we caught up a few weeks ago. Now time's got away on us, but the Queensland Writers Centre Genrecon, it's an annual writers conference. It's a great event. So yeah, you're one of the featuring guests on that show, and we'll talk on that conference. Sorry, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So the three of us actually got to bump in person and actually have a face-to-face conversation, and we had a chat, spoke to you about our podcast, and we were very pleased that you were very, very happy and very sort of enthusiastic about coming on. So we're so pleased you've given up your time. I know you've had a big day with your day job and everything else and family.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, especially too, the balance of having a day job and then doing this crazy thing on the side, which is takes so much of you. But yeah, it was nice. We actually literally bumped into each other. I remember we were outside the entrance, and then I sort of walked into Harry, I think.
Something like that. I have that sort of thing that happens to me. I just get in the way of people, and it seems to work.
So to get things underway, let's quickly talk about each of your three books.
Sure.
So your first book, Snake Island. Now you've got a testimonial.
First one was To Become a Whale was the first one. Snake Island was the second one.
Oh, look at that.
I'm sorry.
I like the covers.
Okay.
I've got
I recently did this because I saw there was another author who actually had their framed covers up. And so because I do this podcast and I do Ben's Book Club and all that sort of stuff, I was like, I kind of need a nice background. So I've got grandma's piano, and now I can make references.
Yeah.
I'll have to say that I have actually done that as well, but unfortunately they're on the wall behind the monitor, so it's a bit pointless, really.
Yeah, you got to turn your thing around.
Yeah.
So apologies, I got the order incorrect. So your first book, To Become a Whale. So I've just got a quote here. It's the story of a young boy who recently has lost his mother, trying to make sense of the world of men, and then embarking on a breathtaking adventure of his own. So tell us a little bit about that novel, and where did the idea come from that sort of spawned the early version of that manuscript?
Yeah, it's because you sent through a little bit of this is what we'll be talking about, but it had me thinking. I wrote that book in I think. I finished it in 2016 or 2015, because you know how long it takes to then submit it and get it, optioned and then sent to publishers, and they want it, and it takes a long time. So I'm nearly a decade removed from doing that. And so it's a real, it's really interesting now when I have people who read that novel. It always strikes me that it's like I've time traveled from 10 years ago into the now, and they're getting to know me from back then, and I feel like a very different person now. But that novel was actually the 5th full-length novel that I'd written.
Wow.
So I'd been writing for, I think, about 9 years, and I'd routinely had a book per 2 years, roughly. And I don't know how you guys work, but I think I figure out how to do something by doing it. I'm not very good at thinking about it and then seeing how, like, making a perfect plan and then executing the plan. I sort of have to dive into the pool to learn how to swim. So I needed to write these 4 other books before I started work on To Become a Whale. And it was I often talk about it when I'm doing creative writing, teaching. It's, if I could go back and bottle whatever the heck I was, whatever juice I was on back then, to, that motivation to get up and actually do the thing, because no one wanted them. No one wanted me to get up and write those words every day. There wasn't someone saying, hey, can you come on my podcast to talk about the 1,000 words you did today? It was just, and if you told me at the start, you do this 1,000 words every single day for 9 years, and then eventually you might get published, I don't know. I don't know if it was me now, whether I would have the gumption to stick to it. But the actual story came from this father and son dynamic. So I just recently become a dad, and it was about relationships between fathers and sons. And I just had this image of this father and son building a shack in the wilderness together. And that's all I had. And so I started to write from there. I started to just see what would happen. But eventually it came to me that I wanted it to be a bit more dramatic. And so I needed the father to just leave the site for a while, just let the kid stay there, to turn him into a real asshole. You know what I mean? And so I actually was like, what's an instance why he would have to leave? He would maybe had a job. And so I had to find a job for him to have. And so I literally went onto Google and I said, interesting Queensland jobs from history. And up came the Moreton Island whaling station and Tangalooma. And it was the biggest whaling station in the Southern Hemisphere. And as soon as I found that setting, and I found this book on there called The Whalers of Tangalooma, and there were images. And as soon as I got all that, I was like, this is such a vivid, interesting place. And so then I thought about this young, sensitive kid and what would happen if the father dragged him out to that whaling station. How would the kid thrive in that world of men? How would he go? That's where that story came from.
That's an interesting jump. You said your first idea of the concept was just father and son together in a cabin, and then that's kind of leapt. The idea is then just grown its own legs into suddenly the whaling becomes a major thing.
It's the shack in the wilderness is still actually fairly important to the story, but the whaling and the whaling station did take over a bit. But I actually find a lot of the time when I'm writing that those slow discoveries that are instinctual, that come out of those little moments where you're searching for something, those often turn into the most special things. So I don't know whether you can see the cover, but the cover has a little kid and a dog on the cover looking out on the ocean over the beach, which is a beautiful cover. The day you get your first cover, and oh man, I can't even describe it. But
I'm pretty certain that the people on the podcast won't see it. So
okay, well, I don't know. Look up to
You've
Become a
described
Whale.
it well.
Yeah. But I was just writing, and then the father was driving with the son somewhere, and he just turned to the kid and said, oh, let's get you a dog. And I didn't know where that came from. I didn't know that was going to be a part of the story. And then all of a sudden we had this whole thing where they would go and get this little puppy, and the boy would care for the puppy, and it turned into this mirror image of the boy caring for the puppy and the father caring for the son, discipline and all that. That little instinctual thing, I've learned to follow those little nuggets a bit more unashamedly, maybe.
Yeah, and sort of feeding new layers into the story as you go. These new ideas just sort of pop up as you're writing.
Yeah, I'm actually at the moment. I really don't ever do this, and it's something I'm actually don't think I'm very good at. But I'm writing like a grant application for this new project that I'm working on. But it's forcing me to write about the book before I've written it, and I'm finding I can do it, but I just because I feel like it's not a book yet, and I need to see what it is to know what it is. Like it's the process of discovery. I think that's really important, and I really get a bit I get a bit envious of authors who say this is what I'm writing and here's what it will be, and then it turns out to be perfectly that thing. I wish I had that skill, but I just don't. It's not the way I work.
I am intrigued that you said that you had this sort of idea once you became a father. You obviously have a very forgiving partner who's willing to allow you, when you had a newborn, to actually write a book.
Yeah, well, can I say that when I had the newborn, Charlie, he a big part of my life did absolutely become about the kid. And I'm a huge believer in fathers being fathers and not just taking care of their own children because they feel guilted into it by their wives. Like it's my here's my duty. Like that's my responsibility. So yeah, I was up in the middle of the night. I was up late hours, early morning. You know, nothing compared to what Lena went through, but I was trying my best to lend a hand. But I tell you what, when you're in that middle of the 2 a.m. and you're patting your kid on the bum in his cot, singing him a song for 2 hours, it's some good thinking time.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually wrote my second book when I was on long service leave. My third child had been born, and my wife was back at work, and I guess for a few months I was sort of like during the day the primary care of my baby. But same again, it actually there were moments when he was sleeping and I had that, even though I was fatigued, I still had this strong desire to write, and it was a great opportunity to actually sit down and get some words on the page.
It's strange, hey? Like I find, because I'm a high school teacher, we're coming up to, end of term. I always think in my head that I've got these 2 weeks, I'm going to smash out all these writing goals. I don't do anything.
No.
Like I just, unless my time is like being stolen from me, it seems less precious and I don't make the most of it. So, at the moment, school term, packing the kids' lunches, getting them to school, trying to exercise after work, doing things like this at nighttime. So I write from about 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. to 5:45. That's it. That's all the time I have. But it's enough. And I've learned, over so many years of having a full-time job and being an author and doing interviews and things like that, where you have to read a lot of books and things like that. I've just learned to make the most of the time, and I write very quickly. And yeah, during the day, if an idea pops into my head, I'll often email myself just quick notes. So I have this long email chain from myself to remember important things. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's probably a very productive way of doing it. As you said, that 45 minutes that you dedicate each day because you're highly motivated to focus on that 45 minutes that you've allowed yourself. That method is probably more efficient than, say, someone who, as you say, you think you got as much time in the world as you like to write, and you find reasons to procrastinate.
Yeah, I think so. And I think forcing myself to write quickly it's changed how I write and we might get into this a bit later too, but I write very instinctually, and I try my best to actually get out of my own way. And I've come to this idea that if I'm thinking about a sentence, or if I'm thinking about how to put a thing together, it feels false.
Yeah.
It feels like I've overthought it. It feels like I'm being pretentious. It feels like, if I have a high vocabulary, all of those different words that I've got in the back of my head, I'm trying to just fudge them in there to try to, pretend that I know more than I know, like I'm smart. But when I'm writing in a way that's so fast, like I don't have time to stop and think about it, it just sort of flows out of you. And I find there's all these little intricate nooks and crannies that I find my most favorite part of the stuff that I write are all those little things that perhaps if I had been thinking about it, I wouldn't have been able to come up with.
Mm. Yeah, I think when you hit one of those purple patches where it's just flowing and you can hardly keep up with yourself and you're buzzing because the story is just buzzing out of you. That's a really special time to write, I think, as opposed to those days where you have those hard chapters or the hard scenes where you got to push through and you got to construct something. Whereas those days where it's far more just instinctive and the dialogue is coming to you as you're trying to keep up with your own fingers as that dialogue's coming to your mind. I mean, that's the fun part of writing, isn't it?
That's the key. That's the real stuff. Like that, I don't think I can write any other way because I don't have time. So I just have to, even when I'm not feeling it, like even when I'm not in that, like I know what you mean, that zone where you get into that state of flow and it's just pouring out of you. Even when I'm not in that zone per se, I'm writing as quickly as I can in a way to maybe try to get to that place. Because I agree. And I often think that writing to me, especially with characters, feels like acting. I always feel like I've never done improvisation at all, like in a theater or anything like that. But I feel like I'm all the characters and I'm trying to instinctually act and think and feel and notice in the way those characters interact naturally. And so you're sort of just wearing all these hats and quickly changing them all very quickly.
Yeah. So can we talk about your second book, Snake Island? So after your first book, published by Allen and Unwin, so the journey to start writing Snake Island, did that happen after you've completed To Become a Whale, or was that one of the manuscripts that you already had on the go?
So after To Become a Whale was, Alan Unwin picked it up, which was, one of the greatest moments of my entire life was when Alan Unwin wanted to publish my book. I'm a writer and I can't describe what that feeling's like. This decade-long goal, you finally crossed the finish line. So that was amazing, but I very quickly turned to, it took about 5 to 6 months to get story edits. So those big notes for the whole manuscript, the big notes on character and this character's motivation is a bit wonky, those big notes that you get. It took about 5 or 6 months. And so while I was waiting for those notes, I thought I would write the first draft of another novel. And there was this circumstance that happened where my auntie Rose very sadly took ill very quickly with cancer. It was an incredibly aggressive form of cancer. And because I live in Queensland now, I moved up here because I met my wife up here. So I moved up here to be with her. So all my family's in Victoria, but then we heard Auntie Rose was sick. And we hadn't seen her for a while, but we knew we weren't going to get a chance again. So Lena and I quickly put the kids in our Toyota RAV4, and we just bolted down. We were at the beach, we're at Redcliffe, and we just came home, showered, jumped in the car, and we just started driving. And I sort of took it upon myself to drive the majority of it. Just because I wanted the kids and the wife to sleep and, have a moment. So I powered through the night, and as I was driving, I needed to stay awake. It was 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I don't know if you've driven the Newell Highway, but there are all these, especially if you're an idiot like me and who puts the GPS on, the GPS takes you on all these little back roads, which you might save a second or two, whereas I could have just shot through on the highway. But I was winding all through these little things, and there were lots of kangaroos, and those dawn kangaroos come out. And so I was sort of coming up with this novel which had multiple characters. I was really influenced by this TV show called Fargo, especially season 2, which had a criminal, enterprise, but it had all these different small town feelings. I'm like, I was from a small town, I could write about it. But then I'm driving, and the thought struck me that if this kangaroo bounced out in front of the car and smashed this windscreen up, it could just be a really interesting inciting incident, a very Australian sort of thing. And the rest of the novel I plotted as I drove for the rest of that night and then into the morning. And so when I got to my hometown in Yarram in the bottom of Victoria, I very quickly got a piece of paper and I wrote down like a really rough chapter outline. I had like 7 characters. Like I'd really mapped it out. It's probably the most mapped out piece of work I've ever done.
And this is all still in your head at this point?
All still in my head. So I very quickly wrote it down. But what had happened, because I don't know whether you've ever experienced just these long drives, but I was so depleted that I ended up getting so sick that I couldn't see Auntie Rose, even though I'd gone down there, because she was in intensive care and I didn't want to, go in there as sick as I was. It was okay because we brought the gift of my kids down for my mum, which was a really nice distraction, and
yeah,
it was really helpful for her to have the joy of the kids there. I think it was a very sad time, but I was just sick on the couch. But I did manage to get down the rough outline of Snake Island before I collapsed. But the books, I wish I had it here. Because the dedication is to Auntie Rose in that
right.
novel.
Okay, great.
She would have been a big fan of it, I think, because it's a bit cheeky, it's a bit black sheepy. It's she was always a bit naughty, my Auntie Rose. She was pretty cool. So,
did you ever get the opportunity then to chat to her about it, or because you were crook, you didn't actually get to see her face to face?
No, no, it was so early, and she just passed away so quickly that I ended up getting her a copy of To Become a Whale, but it didn't even have a cover. Like, that's how early on it was. Yeah. And so I printed off a copy of Office Works and I got it to her. It was one of the last things actually that she got was a copy of that book. She seemed really excited to read it, but she died the next day or two, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about her more recently, actually, because she was younger too. So I'm turning 40 this year, and she was 49, I think. So I'm gonna soon be like the age she was. But I remember the dedication now. It said, "If you didn't know her, you missed out."
yeah, that's very cool.
She was really cool. Yeah.
And just speaking on that, I'd note that you also had some other impressive testimonials for that book. I see there was a comment by none other than Australian author Candice Fox, who in her testimonial, I think it's on the front cover of your novel, it says, Snake Island takes you to the limits of human emotion, a vivid, consuming dive into family loyalty, violence, and the heart's broken when the two collide. Candice Fox, but not to be outdone, you've also got testimonials from Chris Hammer and Mark Brandy. So these are probably 3 of my favorite Australian authors, and you've been snagged testimonials of all 3. Well done on that for a start. And how did you manage that?
Yeah, well, I'll be 100% honest with you. I didn't manage any of it. So my publisher has, I have the same publisher as Chris Hammer. We have the same agency as well. He has a different agent, but we share the same agency. So I know Chris. But honestly, I think Candice and I share an agent as well, actually. And then, so I was able to go through. But I'd also met Candice at the Byron Bay Writers Festival as well. And then Mark... I knew Mark a little bit, but we got together at a writers thing in Airies Inlet, which is down the bottom of Victoria, which was beautiful. Great Escape Books put on this wonderful thing where it was like a literary lunch, and everyone who got there got either a copy of Mark's book or my book, and we were on this panel together while we all ate lunch together. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done. Yeah. So I guess. I also remember maybe I do know people, at the Byron Bay Writers Festival, I had driven down, because I'm from Brisbane, and I had, those dorky crocodile animal prints you put in the back to shade your little newborn so they don't get the sun on their eyes. And there was a party that I was going to, and Chris and Mark Brandy begged a lift off me. And so I got them into my little Corolla. And I just remember thinking, this is ludicrous. Like, Chris Hammer's in the back staring at these crocodile zebra prints of my kids. Like, there's been a few times where I've been struck with how strange my life is sometimes. Like, what am I doing here? Like, how?
Well, I was
Why
going to ask
people?
that. I was going to ask that question, and even though we haven't got your third book yet, but I was going to ask the question: how has the life of Ben Hobson, author, changed since the publication of your first book?
Wow. Um. Oh, in huge different ways. That's such a good question. I don't know whether I've ever really thought about that, because I think most of the changes happen over the course of time, and they're very gradual. They're very these small changes, but then they're also incredibly dramatic. I would say one of the biggest things is that my life has become, I think, a lot more adventurous. Like I'm doing, where I'm doing author interviews or I'm being interviewed, but I'm consistently being pushed outside my comfort zone, having to go and talk with people who I find, much like you guys, obviously, very impressive people that I have to talk to. And I don't know, I just sometimes I look around and just think that this is a very strange type of life that I lead. But it's also really, really, it's a real blessing to be in the position where people want to read things that I create. And you do feel like, before, I think it was a bit of the hustle to try to prove yourself a little bit. And now it's less of that. And I'm sort of settling into perhaps my way of creating. I think perhaps it just feels validating in its way. And so I think I feel generally happy to be me, if that makes sense.
And I think it's about enjoying the ride. I mean, this gig, you just never know what's around the corner. And I guess, you make honey while what's the saying? Make hay while the sun shines.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's definitely that. It's definitely that. And I don't take it for granted. And it could, I might never write another book that anyone wants. I might fizzle out from here. Who knows? But it's every single time I do something like this, I'm really grateful that I get to. It's a very special, adventurous, and interesting life. And I do think too, I'd like to think too, that for my two sons, seeing their dad, do things that he's passionate about, that are a bit scary and adventurous, and I think that's good for them to see a person chasing their dreams, because I want them to chase their dreams as well with everything they've got.
That's a real. I can only I can talk about that personally as well. Just digressing very quickly. That whole thing about your kids, and you're probably the same, Carrie. You got grown up kids as well. About, like, for me, I had to make the decision. I was a career police officer, and I received a lot of support from friends, colleagues, but also my family, my own kids, my wife, when I made the decision to leave the police to pursue this gig of trying to be a professional author. And kind of comments from my adult children sort of saying, "We're proud of you, Dad. This is really cool." And that meant so
Cool.
much to me as a parent.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I love to hear that. That's really cool. You got that support too. Because I don't know how you feel. Sometimes I feel like I want to provide for my family. Like, that seems like, that's what my job is to go out and earn money. My wife, I think, earns more money than I do, but I want to contribute to the home. And then it seems very risky for me to not do that through my day job. And I actually tried at the start of last year to take one day off per week from high school teaching, which the education department were really, really kind and enabled me to do that. But it was such a big pay cut on my paycheck. Like, I had to go back. Like, it was so much money. I just felt like I was losing money every day. So that's really cool, Jack, that you did that. It's bold. I hope to do that one day myself.
I've got a mate who was a teacher, and he, when he first started, they offered him 80% of his salary, or he discovered that there was this factor that you could have of 80% of your salary. On the 5th year, you got 80% of your salary, but you didn't have to turn up to work.
What?
So he had a whole year off. But you've got to be able to afford to work on to live off 80% of the salary. But he went traveling for a year.
That's awesome.
And was paid.
That's really cool. Yeah, I don't know how I would go in year 2, facing another 4 years. I don't know how I would go.
Yeah,
But
there was somebody who followed him the next year, and unfortunately, the year that she actually had to go traveling all around the globe was 2020. So it didn't go so well for her.
No, no good, no good.
Not so good. Not so good.
Excuse me. So Ben, I wanted to I was going to ask you later, but we might as well segue into it now. When we're talking about balancing your day job as a high school teacher with your writing, have you found there's been any conflict of interest in between the two, or does one almost complement the other, where your students know that you're an author and you can kind of use that with some of your teaching with the students? Just talk us through that.
Yeah, so I'm pretty upfront about it with the education department, but no, there hasn't been much in the way of a conflict of interest. I generally only do podcasts and interviews at nighttime in my own time, or I do them on weekends or in school holidays if I'm doing a thing. Or I'll apply for long service leave or leave without pay if I'm doing a festival which goes on Friday or something like that. So it's really just been in my own time. I am very aware though that, I don't often talk about education. I don't often talk about being a high school teacher beyond simply, saying that I am one. Because obviously, what goes on at school, I feel is pretty, I'd like to keep that private, obviously, just given that I'm dealing with people's kids every day, I wouldn't want to be talking about things behind people's back. So I haven't found it very difficult to navigate, but I think I'm a bit of a private person that way anyway. So it's not something that I think about too often. Yeah.
So you haven't set one of your books as a class reader yet then?
No, I don't. I would feel way too strange to do that. I use other people's books when I'm teaching. I did get one instance that was a bit strange when To Become a Whale was translated into French. It came out in France. And in my bio for To Become a Whale, I used to write the exact school that I taught at. I don't mention it anymore because, again, I like to keep it private. But I think someone in France got a hold of the book and then figured out the high school that I worked at, and then sent me email to the admin at the school, who then forwarded it on to me. Like, what the heck is this? This French email? And it was about a guy who was writing to me about his book he'd written about a whaling station, and he liked my book. It was really lovely, but that's probably the strangest thing that's happened, I think.
So are you able to use your learnings as an author with what you teach to high school students? What subjects do you teach?
I teach music. I have a degree in music, and then I teach English. I'm actually teaching literature this year. But yeah, I do. Absolutely. I'll often get asked about, especially creative writing, which is something that I think a lot of English teachers struggle with. I think it's obvious. I think it's a part of English that I feel really comfortable with, but I'm more of a creative person, I think. Given music and given all the different things that I've done with my life. So I think I'm just naturally inclined to be a bit freer and like to just create and throw things. And I'll often say to students too, like, I'm not going to give you a grid of 50 things to remember and tick before you write a word on your story. Write the story. Let's see what happens. Oh, this is cool. We could change. I prefer them to write without restriction, and then we can edit and make it better together later on. Whereas, yeah, I think English teaching sometimes can get, every teacher's different, but it can get very rigid. It can get very, here's your topic sentence, and those rules in fundamentals exist for an important reason. But I don't know. I get asked to teach other teachers sometimes about creative writing, which is I love doing. Yeah.
And do you do any sort of extracurriculum workshops through school, or are your teachings all part of your standard curriculum?
No, I teach in line with curriculum. I teach in line. I mean, I run a little writers club at the school, at lunch break. Yeah, so we sort of get together and talk about our stories and things like that. I used to take a excursion to the Brisbane Writers Festival whenever we could and things like that. So yeah, I do that sort of thing. But no, most of the time there's a creative portion of every single year of English. There's still creative writing and monologue writing, and even I would argue persuasive writing has a degree of creativity behind it as well. So, but I also teach like I teach through the Queensland Writers Centre. I teach through the Faber Academy. I do run some writing courses for adults as well.
Mhm.
So I sort of get a lot of my creative writing lessons out that way.
Yeah, excellent, cool. And just jumping ahead to your third novel, The Death of John Lacey, which again, it's a book I read and loved, and I've actually got a signed copy. When I first met you, you did a little
Yeah, I remember, man. I appreciate
event
it.
at the bookstore out at Sanford.
Yeah.
So just a bit of a quote about that book. So it's described as a visceral, powerful dissection of dispossession and colonization and the crimes committed in its name. The Death of John Lacey is also a moving and tender account of the love between brothers and a meditation on the true meaning of mercy and justice. So was it a real shift from your first two novels?
Yeah, it's a really interesting way that Lacey sort of came out, in that I wrote, after Snake Island came out, I was sort of toying with a lot of different projects. And I wrote this section, and Jack, you might remember the section, but it was John Lacey's. It was, I think, in the book, it's now titled "The Conquest of John Lacey." It's sort of his rise to power in Ballarat, and I wrote that, and it was almost just play. It was almost just experimental. I didn't have any illusions that it was going to do anything beyond just be this 20,000 word little thing that I was doing, but I just let myself write in whatever way I wanted, and it was just free. There was no restriction. There was no person on my shoulder saying, well, readers might not like that. Are you sure you want to make him that unlikable? Are you sure? I was just free creativity, the most purest part of it. But I got to the end of that, and I was sort of toying with some other things as well, but I felt unequipped, especially in regards to the Wadawurrung people and First Nations, characters and things like that. I felt very unequipped that way, and I wasn't sure I was adequate enough to the task of even the thing that I'd written. Like, it was like this, it was like it was unknowable. Like, I couldn't come back to it. I was like, what is this thing? I didn't know what it was. And then in early 2020, I went to Nepal, and I went on a hike up to Mount Everest base camp. So it's about a 18-day, 20-day round trip. It feels strange to say I climbed up to the bottom of Mount Everest.
Yeah.
So when you tell the story, it sounds weird to say that, but it's very arduous. Probably one of the hardest physical challenges I've ever done in my life. But again, that story of me where, for 10 hours you're hiking, and we had this guy named Raju, and he would say, slowly, slowly, because there's no oxygen, so you can't breathe. So you're walking like just one little step at a time. Is so slow, slowly, slowly. It's agonizing, and it's beautiful, but you want your mind to be active. And so I wrote this whole book in my head. I came up with this whole design, and it was going to be, you know what, damn it, I'm going to write a book that people will love. I'm going to have an Australian Federal Police agent. I'm going to have, or officer, I should say. I was going to have this thriller, and it was sort of modeled after all these action thrillers that I'd watched, like Smoking Aces and all these different perspectives. And there was this terrorist attack, and it was this big thing. And I came back to Queensland, and I was quarantined, and it was just as COVID was kicking off. So I had what was called the Kumbu cough, where you have no oxygen. So you come back from Nepal with this cough you can't shake. So I was a leper whenever I left the house, which I didn't leave the house. But I actually started working on this thing, and I was so excited. And I was writing thousands of words a day, every day, just because I had time. We'd watch a Marvel movie every night with the kids, and I would write in the day, and it was great. And I came up with this whole book, and I workshopped it. I sent it to people. I sent it to my agent. I had this whole, it was 90,000 words. I wrote this thing, and I did everything I could to make it as good as I could. And then I heard back from my publisher that she did not care for it.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Very politely, very gently, very lovingly, I have to say. And it wasn't a nice phone call, I think, for either of us. But she said, I just don't think this is quite the thing that we love that you do with the other two books, which is much more character based, which is much more thematic.
And there's also historical elements to the other two novels as well, that they're all sort of set
Yeah.
in previous eras, and as well as the Death of John Lacey, when's that set in the late 1800s?
Yeah, and this was late 1800s, but this was a modern novel. And so I think perhaps I'd let myself get to the point where I was writing I think I write the best when I'm exploring something that's really interesting to me, and I don't think I have an answer to it, like a question like how do you be a dad? You know, that's to become a whale, and I still don't know the answer to that. Like, you know, when should you be firm and discipline your kids, or when should you be soft, or you should be both, or, you know. So when I'm writing from a place of a question, my writing, I think, is stronger. But this book, I think I was writing in a way because I wanted to sell a book.